Now I'd like to add some more detail to this wheel, and before we do that, it will be much easier if we clean up our viewport a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is hide everything except for what I'm currently working on, because I find all this other stuff in the viewport distracting. So let's select the wheel item for the moment, head up to the View menu, and down to Hide Unselected, or Shift H. That is incredibly useful for hiding everything except the thing that you want to work on. Really nice. Now, it's hard to tell where this exists in space at the moment because the grids are turned off. If you'll recall, last time we used the Control 1 Pi menu, went down to toggle grid and work plane and let go of Control 1, and that will bring back our work plane. Of course, you can also access that in the viewport properties in the visibility section under Show Grid and Show Work Plane. Now, one other thing, as we're working on this wheel, it'll be much easier to work with if it's centered. Currently, this thing is existing off in space. The origin of our document is over here at the top right of my viewport right now, and our wheel is floating out here in space. So, for example, if I wanted to grab a cylinder and drag it out, and set its position to 0, 0, 0, that's going to put it over here rather than at the center of our wheel. So rather than do that, let's take the wheel and center it. So to do that, we just go over to our items list. The third column from the left is one for the reference item. Reference item, click that, and all of a sudden that becomes the center of our world. And if we work in it now, if I drag out a cylinder, go 0, 0, 0, it will land at the center of the current mesh item. And later on, when we're done, I can just click this here, and it will go back to its original location. Now, to make it really obvious what's going on here, let's actually unhide, U for unhide. I'm going to click on that reference item column again. And you'll notice that what happens is everything moves. Essentially, really what we're doing is, conceptually speaking, we're not moving the model, we're moving the origin of the document. But you can think of it either way you want. We're moving everything so that it's relative to the tire mesh, or we're moving the document so that the origin lands on the tire mesh. However you want to think of it, essentially this column is going to center us on the center of this item. So, once again, let's select that item. We'll go to View, Hide Unselected. And now we're ready to actually start modeling the center of this wheel. Now, as I said in a previous video, if we go back to the finished mesh and take a look here, this hub is really pretty arbitrarily shaped. We based it on photos that we found online. And again, you can choose to make this look however you want. But I'm going to make something that looks roughly similar to this. So let's go back here. I'll go to the right view, so that we have a good view of this. Shift A to zoom fit. And grab the cylinder tool. Now, I'd like to center this, and as we've seen, if I drag out here, I can come over and click on to gang edit the position of this, set those all to 0, and hit enter, and that would center it. But that seems like a lot of runaround, right? So let's actually learn about a new topic in this video called snapping. Now, snapping is a subject near and dear to many a modeler's hearts, and snapping in 801 is the best it has ever been in Modo. It actually works extremely well. So let's head up here to the Modo Modes bar, find the snapping button, and click it. Now, once you click that, nothing is going to happen. You don't get a fancy drop down. You don't get lots of extra settings or anything like that. It simply enables snapping. And you'll notice that down here in our tool properties, we now have a snapping area. And that is the key difference. So now when I run my cylinder tool, that snapping area is still there in my tool properties. Let's click on that. It'll give us a nice pop-up here. I want to make sure that we are snapping to grid. So let's check the box for snap to grid. And now, when I head out in the viewport, you'll notice that the little blue icon is snapping to grid squares. So I can drag out a cylinder of whatever size I like, hit escape to drop the tool, and now we have a perfectly shaped cylinder, perfectly centered in the middle of our viewport. Let's go to perspective mode here. Select that polygon in poly selection mode, W for move, and as I move it, it will also snap to grid as it goes. If I zoom out, those snap increments will get more and more pronounced. Now, you're also going to notice that I'm actually not snapping as well as you would think. Notice down at the bottom right here, look at my cursor. Notice that there's a blue circle right below my cursor. So right now we're snapping to vertices, not to the grid. If I get out here, then suddenly we're snapping to the grid again. That's because we have vertex snap enabled, which actually overrides the grid snap. So let me undo all that. Let's head back to our snapping panel here and disable vertex snapping. So we're only snapping to grid, and now it's going to snap to grid no matter what, which is really nice. Another thing to note about the grid is that it is a dynamic grid. So as I zoom in, it gets finer. Look, now I move in small increments. If I zoom out, it's going to move in very large, chunky increments. So zoom in to the level that you need to get the level of detail that you want. Go to the front view here and move it in just inside of that wheel. Go back to perspective mode. And I'm going to thicken this using the thicken tool in the basic tools here. Click in the viewport to do that. Pull that out. And that's a starting point for us. W for move, and then it will snap to the grid again. Notice that the bevel tool does not snap to grid because of the way that it operates. The bevel tool doesn't have a dynamic action center, and the action center itself is what's doing the snapping. Keep that in mind as you're working. What you're snapping is not the geometry, but the action center. We'll talk more about that as we get more advanced with this stuff. Let's hit B for bevel, click in the viewport, drag that in a little bit, and pull that out. Once again, it's not going to snap for us, unfortunately. Then we will shift click in the viewport, pull that out until we like what we see, and hit the space bar to drop the tool. Now we've made a little mistake here. I'm noticing that the cylinder is too big in diameter. I actually want it to be smaller. The easiest way to fix that would be to select some polys, L for loop, R for scale, and then we can just scale this on two axes at once. There is another way, though, that's useful to know about in case you need to offset something that's not purely circular. In other words, scaling won't work perfectly. We have another tool here called Deform Push. Push is essentially like offset in CAD packages. It's a way of pushing the polygons along their current normals, which is another very useful way to be able to deform your geometry. So whichever way you like works fine. Let's select these polys. I'll get this entire loop, W for move, and I'm going to move that back some. Something like so. That's starting to look a little bit better. Select this, B for bevel, click in the viewport, and just pull it out. And then I'd like a little bit of a hub at the end of this. So let's loop select this outer loop, B for bevel, click in the viewport, and pull that out. Now, for some reason, group polygons got turned off for me, so let's head over to our bevel tool properties, click on group polygons, and just scale that in somewhat. There we go. Escape to drop the tool, escape to drop the selection, and note that this stuff is smooth, this stuff is not. So before you hit the tab key, be sure to select the faces down here, then hit tab, then click off, and then now everything matches, right? Very important that everything matches for your own sanity. Now, let's look at a few things about this sub-D mesh here. First of all, obviously, we don't have quite enough detail in here. We've done lots of beveling to add detail, so let's add a different kind of detail in this case. I'm going to select this edge loop, and rather than beveling it, let's head to our vertex map dropdown and down to the weight tool, or edge weight, whichever you prefer. They will both work. I'll click in the viewport and then drag, and notice that that is going to gradually sharpen that edge as I drag up toward 100%. That is going to work just fine for us. Hit escape to drop that tool. Now we can add edge weights as often as we like. So let's select these two. And rather than head to Vertex Map Weight tool every time, I tend to use Shift W on the keyboard to get to that. You can do it whichever way you prefer. I'm going to bring that all the way up to 100%, so those are nice and sharp. We'll go over to the other side here, do the same thing with this one. Shift W, click in the viewport. Because we used 100% last time, it's going to just go ahead and apply that 100% as soon as I click in the viewport. I don't need to drag, and that should take care of it. Zoom out here. That's looking pretty good. One other thing, take a look at this polygon. Notice how can you see how there's just a little bit of weirdness in the middle of this polygon? You get all these little triangles stretching out in the middle. That's because of this polygon right here. This is a concept in sub D known as an n-gon, n as in Nancy, or as in the letter that you use in math when you don't know the number you're talking about. N means any number. In this case, an n-gon is a polygon with any number of sides other than 4. So n-gon in this case means we have, I don't know, a lot of sides. Let's select that and see how many. 24 edges. Way too many. Way more than 4. N-gons actually are difficult to smooth, and therefore you get this weirdness in them. But the thing about n-gons is that they don't really matter on flat surfaces. They smooth just fine if they're flat. So what we'll do is B for bevel, click in the viewport, and just pull that in some. Shift-click, do it again. Shift-click, do it again. Escape to drop the tool, and escape to drop the selection, and now we have a perfectly smooth mesh because, if we hit the tab key, this n-gon is now located in a perfectly flat area because of our beveling. So if you notice that people add lots of extra bevels to the insides of their circles on the ends of cylinders, that would be why, because it puts that n-gon in a flat place where it's not going to cause any problems. Okay, with our hub in place, I think we can turn off that reference center and then go to item selection mode, hit U for unhide, bring everything back, and we can see that everything is working just perfectly. Now in the next video, we're going to use some curves to add the individual spokes to this, and we can actually render those curves dynamically in Moto's renderer, so it should work really nicely for us. Stay tuned.